Hello and welcome to Develop Brighton 2020 and our keynote session. I'm James Batchelor, UK editor at GamesIndustry.biz, in slightly less glamorous settings than the usual Hilton down on the seafront. I am delighted to be joined by Todd Howard, designer, director and producer at Bethesda Game Studios. Todd, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Sorry I couldn't make it over, but this will do.
This will do. It's 2020. The fact that we managed to get you onto a Zoom call, that's an accomplishment. Todd has worked in the industry for 26 years, almost entirely at Bethesda. He began as producer and designer on the Terminator Future Shock in 1995, but has since had pivotal roles on numerous Elder Scrolls games, including Morrowind, Oblivion and Skyrim, and Fallout 3, Fallout 4 and Fallout 76. Honours he has received include a place in the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Hall of Fame, the GDC Lifetime Achievement Award, Germany's Lara of Honour, Game Lab Spain's Legend Award, the New York Game Critics Legend Award, and of course this year's Developed Star Award. There is a lot to cram into the next hour, so I'm going to dive straight into it. How did you get started in games, and how did you get started at Bethesda?
Well, I think it's, the time I grew up, computers were just hitting the schools, maybe it was the early 80s. And I was always into video games. I think people of that time period, that's when video games were coming on computers and the arcades, the Atari 2600, and just kind of fell in love with playing them. And once I got my hands on an Apple II, I wanted to figure out, I want to do this myself. How do I make one? So I just started, made my first game when I was 12, and just kept writing my own games. It was my hobby.
What was that first game? What did a 12-year-old Todd Howard produce?
What was my first one? There was a Star Trek game at the time where you plotted things, and I made kind of a ripoff where you were riding shotgun on a Wild West, wagon, and I thought it was brilliant, and I entered it in like a school computer contest, and I lost. And but I was undeterred.
You've definitely shown them since, I think.
Yes.
You are obviously best known for Elder Scrolls and Fallout, but as we mentioned, you started with the Terminator game. Now, I'll be honest, I had not heard of this game until prior to doing this keynote, and about
That's
an hour.
Not uncommon.
Well, about an hour or so ago, I looked up some YouTube footage, and my God, it looks brilliant. It's like a Terminator Future Shock was like a first-person RPG. It looked like a first-person RPG, like a Terminator Elder Scrolls. Tell us a little bit more about your work on that and kind of the lessons you learned on that first project, going through the rest of your career.
That, there was a different time. The team was small. Maybe it's 8 people, 6, 10. I don't remember. Say 8 to 10 people. And when I started at Bethesda, we had the Terminator license, which was also in kind of a legal fight. I think it was Carrico and Hemdale. I don't remember. Point being, we had the license and there was nobody checking on us. So, which is brilliant. And this was our 3D engine at the time. And Future Shock is kind of the first 3D full 3D first person shooter. We did mouse look controls, and just a blast of a project. People think about Fallout, that we do Elder Scrolls and Fallout, and we go between, fantasy worlds and then these post-apocalyptic worlds. But we were doing that then, right, in the mid-90s. And so when it came to Fallout, we had already, I had already built 3D post-apocalyptic worlds, and the levels were wide open. But it was a really, really fun project where we kind of got to do whatever we wanted and move fast.
Nice. I genuinely encourage people to look this up on YouTube because I'm not even that big a Terminator fan, but that looked fun. Like there was about a year ago when like everything had the Terminator license. I think you guys need to get it back. Maybe a remaster. We need a remaster.
It's come up, but I think it's unlikely.
Fair enough. So how did you go from the Terminator, like a licensed tie-in, to the Elder Scrolls series? So my understanding is like by the time you first worked on Daggerfall, so Arena was already out?
Arena had just come out when I started on floppy. So my first role was, there was a basketball game I was put on. I'm a big sports fan too. So they had an NCAA basketball game that I produced, and then I was put on to the CD-ROM version of Arena. So Arena had just come out. So I worked on the CD-ROM version. Daggerfall was in development. And again, the development staff was maybe 20 people. The whole company is like 20 some people tops. And so everybody kind of worked on everything. Future Shock was my main project, but I was also on Daggerfall. And then when Future Shock wrapped up, I was full-time Daggerfall, but everybody was.
Mm. So how did the series, or how did working on the series differ back then? Because obviously, the technology was somewhat more limited, the hardware was somewhat more limited. You compare like Arena and Daggerfall to, say, Morrowind, and it's very obviously a much more primitive is a harsh word, but you know what I mean, like a much more kind of basic version of what would eventually become Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim. Like, but in terms of the actual design process, like what differed back then?
Well, I think, look, when you look at games, certain things can seem primitive through the lens of time and technology, but at the time we were doing similar things that we do now, believe it or not. So even though the scale has increased, what we were doing in comparison to other games really has not. One of the exercises I love is to go back and read old reviews of games. And if you go back and read a review of Arena or Daggerfall, the words they use and the way they express the game, the way it makes them feel, is similar to the way we want the Elder Scrolls in the games today to feel. And so obviously it was smaller. We moved a lot faster. So the games, they took shorter to develop, but the goals and the way we thought about it really aren't that different.
Mm. But there have been differences over the years. So kind of let's look at a bit broader before we dive into each one, as in each title. How did the series evolve from your point of view? Like what were the key steps forward, like the key advances in that Elder Scrolls formula? Because you go back to Arena and even Daggerfall, and the bare bones of what would become Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim is there. So what were the big steps forward in terms of advancing that formula, as it were?
Well, I think they take steps in terms of Arena sets the world of Tamriel. Okay, you can go anywhere and do whatever you want. Daggerfall makes a step design-wise primarily in the character system. It's a really, really good character system with skills. Arena is an XP-based game. Most people associate Elder Scrolls with use skills and improve them now. That was a Daggerfall thing. And then Morrowind, there was a big gap too. Company went through some difficult times financially, and the company had shrunk. We made some bad games, we made some mistakes, and the development team, we probably went down to 6 people. So that's kind of I see Morrowind as the beginning of kind of Bethesda 2.0, or this, the Bethesda people know today really started with Morrowind. And we did take a step back in terms of moving away from kind of an infinite procedural world, which Arena and Daggerfall are basically infinite random procedural worlds, to a handcrafted one. I'm a big fan of the Ultimas, and I really wanted to move it where it felt more real on a minute-to-minute basis with the items in the world and the things you could do. And so Morrowind becomes a very large game, but a handcrafted game.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit. Let's go on a tangent. Handcrafted versus procedural generation. Like we've seen a lot more open worlds in recent years. Like stuff arguably that kind of builds on games like Morrowind. Everything's an open world now, and there is a mix between, you've got your handcrafted worlds, things like your big Assassin's Creed, your Witchers, your Cyberpunks, those sort of things, and then you do still have these procedurally generated ones, things like No Man's Sky. Like, what are the advantages and disadvantages either way? Like, what is it that gives you a preference for a handcrafted world?
I don't necessarily have a preference. So we've done a bit of both. Oblivion, then the landscape is somewhat procedural. Then we went over it with hand just to make sure things are the way we like. And so I think a mix is good. Procedural helps you, and we still do some procedural quests and storytelling in those ways, or random encounters. It keeps it fresh, where we don't know what exactly is going to happen all the time, and the players don't know what's going to happen. But there's a difference between the world itself. We want to spend our time handcrafting the things that you can tell are handcrafted, whereas nature, computers can do a good job at putting trees and rocks and making landscape around that you can massage. So we want to make sure, for the scale of our development and our team, that we're touching the things that are most important. And if we can use procedural systems to generate content that keep the game kind of everlasting, then that's what we want to lean on. And so we went away for a while, and then we've been coming back to it over time. That we like to experiment each game with somewhat procedural stuff, and then where it's not working out, we go in and touch it. And the stuff we're doing now, we're pushing procedural generation further than we have in a very, very long time with the stuff that's coming up.
Nice. So Elder Scrolls 6, all procedurally generated, confirmed. Lovely, thank you. Let's dive in a little bit more on Morrowind then. As you said, like for you, it was kind of the start of Bethesda 2.0. It certainly feels like a moment in the Elder Scrolls system series history and Bethesda's history. Like it was my introduction to the series. It was my introduction to open world RPGs, and certainly to the Western style RPG. And I haven't gone back since. From your point of view, like what was the impact it had? Like from internally, like, you know, this game came out and it was bigger than anything you guys had done before. Bigger in terms of scale and style, I'd say, rather than, like you said, you know, it's a specific region. So geographically, it is not the biggest game you have made, but in terms of production, it certainly was. Like, what was the impact, you know, internally, like the success that Morrowind had?
Well, it was huge. You know, again, the company had gone through a lot of troubles, and that was a game where I put it in this context of we kind of had no fear. Like we felt the company was going to go out of business, so we got a chance to make more. When it's like, what's the worst that's going to happen? Let's just make the game that we know we want and the fans want, and not be afraid. Not that you're afraid in other games, but we took a few more risks on that game, and you know, if it hadn't worked out, I don't know that we'd be here. And it worked out better than we could have imagined. People really gravitated toward it. It did incredibly well on the Xbox. I believe it was the second bestseller behind Halo. It obviously did well on the PC, but that our introduction to consoles there, that was also a risk for us and something very new. Do people even want that style of RPG in a console at the time? It's very Final Fantasy type games. And that really was a huge jumping off point where we knew, hey, people really want this. We're onto something. And it allowed us to invest even more and do Oblivion and get the Fallout license. So the Fallout license is actually acquired during that gap between Morrowind and Oblivion, even though Oblivion comes out first. And that was I would say Oblivion is a very big bet for the company too, where most companies would say, we must have, Morrowind's a big hit, you clearly would jump onto a sequel. And, you know, fortunate enough in our company that we were able to say, we'd rather take about 4 years and go to these next gen consoles and PCs that are coming and make this game. And that was where, you know, we're incredibly lucky to have the support of a great company that allowed us to do that.
Did anything change when it came to like kind of the momentum, the atmosphere, the ethos behind Oblivion? Because like you said, Morrowind was kind of developed with no fear. It's kind of like, you know, the company may go bust, so let's just throw everything at it. I know you've said previously in interviews that Oblivion, you kind of lost the game lost the sense of wonder that Morrowind had. Like I wonder, like, because you essentially then have expectations, as you said. Like most companies would be like, right, this needs to be a sequel. Morrowind has done so well, this needs to do even better. Like there's more pressure there. Did that change the way you kind of approached it?
No, I don't think there was more pressure. We were taking just as many. They were more calculated risks with Oblivion, because you go into Oblivion pretty confident people are going to want this game's going to do well, right? Whereas Morrowind, you're not as sure how well it's going to do. There was some confidence with what we were doing with Oblivion that it would be successful on some level. Did not expect the success that one had either. Oblivion just becomes this kind of lightning rod for next generation gaming at the time. It won all the Game of the Year awards. the comment you referenced that I made about Oblivion losing some of Morrowind's, Oblivion is comfortable in its setting. It's very classic fantasy. And the things that make Tamriel or the Elder Scrolls unique in the world, they're subtle in Oblivion. They're clearly not. Like Morrowind's vibe is intentionally very exotic, stranger in a strange land. And Oblivion, after we were past it, felt it got a little watered down in the world around you. But the gameplay and the character systems, I think, were much improved over Oblivion's. And that was one of the things going into Skyrim, where we want something that has a little bit of familiarity in terms of, okay, I'm not in a bizarre world, but has this epicness of a fantasy world that has a real identity.
How do you balance that, I guess? Like you're trying to create a fantasy world that is unique, stands up on its own, but also you want enough familiar elements to bring people in. Like, apologies, I may ramble here, but like, so Morrowind I played, and it's stunning. Nothing I've played before. You know, this giant silt strider at Sedonin. It's like I have no idea what that is. You know, floating niches everywhere. It felt like a very different world. Giant mushrooms that, you know, bigger than trees. This feels like a unique fantasy world. Got to Oblivion and I absolutely loved it, but there were elements like, well, the guards here kind of look like they're from Lord of the Rings, and Cyrodiil looks like, you know, like the Imperial City looks a little bit kind of Minas Tirith to me. You get to Skyrim and you can feel influence a little bit from, say, like Game of Thrones, that sort of thing. As it Whitethorn is like the town, the first town you go to after the first little village, like it felt kind of very Edoras from Lord of the Rings. There's more elements there. There's like, right, I can almost see where the inspiration has come from here, rather than this feels completely totally out of some developer's imagination. Is that, if that's fair to say? Like, how do you balance, coming out with something completely different, but then something welcoming enough that people are like, I get this is a fantasy thing, I know where I stand?
Well, we want to be authentic to the world we're in, right? So when we approach Skyrim, what feels authentic for that part of Tamriel, and not have it be all snow. That was one of our worries going in. Well, it's going to be all snow. So varying the landscape in a way. When I say inviting, even the beginning of Morrowind, that part of the world you start in has some sort of classic medieval tropes, and you start in the southwest. And when you get to the northeast, that's where it's, you know, extra crazy. We want to lead the player into that, where it's good to you want to pique the curiosity, but not make them uncomfortable, if that makes sense. So the references that you have for Skyrim, you know, it actually predates Game of Thrones in terms of when we were making it and when it came out, and overlapped. There's some, you know, I think you look at, you mentioned Edoras, those things, Minas Tirith, those ultimately are based on the same, they go back to the same reference points in architecture, whether that's Scandinavian or Roman or those kind of things. But obviously some of that stuff seeps in. I'm, you know, a big fan of Lord of the Rings, the books and the movies. And the one thing in Skyrim that we spent probably more time on, people don't maybe notice, are the Nordic ruins. How were the Nords living? What were their gods? How did they worship them? And so even though you're going to see some architecture or things like that that are familiar to you, I think when you get into the ancient Nord stuff and Alduin's Wall and these kind of things, I think we hit a really good, I'm very pleased with how that turned out, and we iterated on that a lot.
We will come back to Skyrim, but I am trying to work through this semi-chronologically if I can. So as you mentioned, like, you guys got the Fallout license before Oblivion came out. So Fallout 3 was kind of in the works. Fallout had been away for some years, or at least certainly hadn't been as prominent. What were the challenges of updating Fallout for modern platforms? Because like Fallout 3 was completely different to all previous Fallout games. Like, they were very much that kind of the top-down isometric style RPG, and here you are with a Fallout 3 that is essentially like a post-apocalyptic Oblivion or Morrowind. Like, what was the challenges of taking this other franchise and applying your formula to it in a way that works, but doesn't feel like you've just reskinned your older games?
Yeah, we had wanted to sort of branch out and have something other than Elder Scrolls, and we had a number of ideas. And post-apocalyptic, there was sci-fi in there as well, was near the top of the list. But for me, it had to be Fallout. Like, we could have made our own, but there was something very special about the Fallout world, and the IP had been dormant, and some folks in our company knew people at Interplay, and we were able to acquire it. And that, to me, is one of the favorite moments of my career, when someone says, "What would you like to make?" Well, I'd really like to make Fallout, but we don't have it. And then maybe 6, 8 months went by, and I can remember to this day this yellow sticky note Todd Vaughn, left on my keyboard. It said, "Fallout is yours." When I came back desk, and like, when does that happen in the world? And we were just overjoyed. We knew what we would do with it, like apply the kind of game that we were making in that kind of world. And the main thing that we looked at was how to handle the guns. Like, what's an RPG? Is it a first-person shooter? How do we tread that line? And that's where we came up with the VAT system to bring some of the RPG-ness into it, where your own personal finger twitch skills don't matter to the extent that they would in some other games. But that, to this day, is one of my favorite projects that I've ever worked on. I mean, obviously we love them all, but that one holds a special place because it was so new for all of us. And when you're making a Fallout game, there's just so much you can do. There's very few ideas that, if you're sitting around going, "Oh, this would be great," that you can't fit in a Fallout game in some manner. It mixes, obviously, post-apocalyptic. It's part drama. It's part dark comedy. It's part B-movie. And it can move, if you're doing it right, it can move between those in a way that it forges its own identity. So obviously, over time, I think we got the license in 2004, 16 years ago. And it's been, very, very special to all of us who've had the opportunity to work on it.
Let's dive a little into the differences between the design decisions. Like you say, like there's certain things in Fallout that just do not apply to Elder Scrolls. For example, guns. Like, I know you've got ranged weapons in Elder Scrolls, but it's not quite the same as a gun. How do you approach designing a Fallout game differently to designing an Elder Scrolls?
Well, what we've done in the previous ones, particularly in 3, and we'll talk Fallout 3 and 4, is that the story is a bit more linear, and the characters in it are more specific. We're telling a more specific story in a Fallout game, and the choices that you make are in many ways we want them dialogue-wise to be more difficult choices. Who do you side with? Who lives? Who dies? What are you going to sacrifice to live, given the nature of the world you're in? Elder Scrolls is, and again, I'm generalizing. There's a huge overlap, and most people can see that. They'll see similar systems in the games. Elder Scrolls is a bit more systemic in its design. Intentionally, you can join all the factions. There's not a specific choice. There's some in Skyrim with the Imperials and the Nords. But so again, I'm generalizing, but that, if I were to go back and look at it, is a bit of a difference in how we approach each one.
How do you balance this? Is going to tie into a certain personal bugbear, is a strong word, but like a personal thing that I find with some open world games. How do you balance telling a more linear story? Because, as you say, Fallout has a more direct storyline. The Elder Scrolls games can very much be right. You can either follow the main quest line or just naff off and do your own thing. Fallout, they have a very good setup of, right, this is the story, this is what's happened. Now you're unleashed from the world. The vault is unlocked. you need to go and do this objective while napping off and doing your own thing. But the balance between trying to tell a story and trying to tell one that's urgent or that has a kind of a momentum without killing that sense of exploration. So Fallout 3 was right. I've got to get out here. My dad has gone missing. I'm going to go to this town, and here I'm going to find lots of different quests that lead off in loads of different directions. Whereas Fallout 4, you are right. My child has been kidnapped. I need to go find them, and that makes it difficult. That can make it difficult. It's like, right, I need to find my child. My child has been missing,
Right.
but I'm first going to stop and help this robot gardener make a greenhouse full of plants. Like it's the dissonance between this is the story you're trying to tell and this is the story the player wants to experience or the adventure the player wants to have. How do you balance that?
That's tricky. I don't know that we've solved it, right? You want some sort of time pressure on the player, but that fights against anything else you're doing, like you said. The stories we've told in Elder Scrolls suit that better, right? The Fallout ones, Fallout 3, I think has more pressure to, get out and find your father. The find your son thing in Fallout 4, because of the way you're frozen, we wanted some element of this is a mystery. There's not the same time pressure. And there's still some dissonance, as you mentioned. But in Fallout 4, I do think the player matches with the player match with the character on the screen better in many ways than Fallout 3. Not to say Fallout 3 doesn't. So when you step out, you feel like you're experiencing the outside world. Like you feel a little bit of the loss of it being destroyed because you were there. You feel the loss of your family, and the game throws a lot of mechanics at you, and it's intentional that you're trying to find your way. It takes a little while for you to feel comfortable in that world. And it's a while before you see another human. And even though you've bought the game, there's going to be other humans. At least one of this thing where if you're really into it, there's a moment, there's a few, let's call it an hour, where you think, am I the only person alive? That being said, Fallout 3's beginning is my favorite beginning of a game that we've done.
It is a great beginning.
And if you go back and play it, it's overly long. It feels long, but the first time you play it, without that opening, when you step out, you don't get the feeling of, I've lived my whole life in the vault. And that got a lot of question marks internally when I was pitching it. Really? How long is that going to take? I'm like, I don't know. We'll do what feels right, but I think it's important when you step out.
Yeah.
Not just the visual, but the emotion of it. It works for like the reality of what you're playing.
Yeah, massively. It drives home like the scope of the world that you've stepped out into more so than just like you start in a vault, you open the door. Oh, look, I'm in a big world. Like it doesn't quite work as well. I think the Fallout 4 thing I have to say is probably because I was playing shortly after my wife had given birth to our son.
Sorry.
My firstborn. No, not at all. It was perfect during paternal leave when like he's kind of sleeping here and I'm like very carefully playing while he's asleep. But I was playing a female character, and just the idea that like, right, this woman not doing everything to go and find her son first, that just jarred with me. That's just personal circumstance. Right, and back on track because I'm going on tangents and I apologise. Let's go back to Skyrim. So Skyrim was the next big game. Not only the most successful Elder Scrolls game, but I believe you told me the most successful Bethesda game of all time. Why? Why is it that this one, more than say Morrowind, Oblivion, or even Fallout 3, why was it this game finally drew millions into kind of the Bethesda formula of open world games?
Well, you know what? If I could answer that, why that one was so successful, it'd be easy to do it time and time again. I don't, I think it touched a nerve. It was our third go around within that hardware cycle. So and one of the great things about being at Bethesda. I'm going to back up, by the way, because when I said I'm sorry, I was sticking in my head like, I'm sorry you had a baby. I didn't mean it that way.
No.
I was, in my mind, I was feeling guilty. You just had a baby, and then we kill the wife or father and steal it. Like,
yeah, that didn't help, I'll be honest.
yeah,
Like,
I think it's great that you had a baby. Man, that was...
It's fine. It's fine.
Because I'm thinking back of shooting, we motion captured that scene, and it was quite... Okay, now we'll go back to Skyrim. So I think the timing of Skyrim, in terms of ourselves, we were really honing what we had been doing, and it's a very inviting game. It was the game where anybody who liked fantasy in any way could say, hey, you got to see this. The platforms had matured by then, so the amount of people that had access to the game, I think success is often based on access. How many people can easily play it? And it just touched a nerve. You mentioned Game of Thrones, which came out soon after. So fantasy maybe was in the zeitgeist, and that was an avenue that people could apply to it. But ultimately, I think its ongoing success is kind of what some, not just Skyrim, but other what games do well. And the thing I think video games are best at are putting people in a world. Games do geography very well, and then saying, what would you do here? And then having the world react to it. And Skyrim, it does that. It has a flow and a vibe that whoever you are, if you like games at all, there's something for you. And the game, you give to the game, and the game keeps giving back.
You mentioned obviously that you'd had several goes at the hardware cycle, so it's it was tail end of the previous generation, or previous generation, since we're on the cusp of the new generation. I lose track. We're on that cusp period, aren't we? If you were making Skyrim from scratch for the new consoles, because I'm going to assume that it's going to come to the new consoles. This is not a trick question.
I sense a trick question. Yeah.
No, I promise you, no trick questions here. If you were making Skyrim from scratch for the new consoles, what would you be able to do that would be possible now, that wasn't in the original version? Like, were there ideas that had to be cut that PS5 or Xbox Series X would have enabled?
Probably just the amount of NPCs, and obviously you get the fidelity, right? So the graphics will be better, but whatever. The amount of NPCs and the feeling of the other people in Skyrim and how they react to you. The cities are, in your mind, like you've been to Whiterun and that's this big city, but it's not. And maybe there's 20 people walking around total. So that's probably the main thing, where the hardware and those kind of things get you. But by then we had gotten pretty good with our technology at streaming and those kind of things, where we were able to throw a lot of stuff coming in the world. But yeah, probably the people.
I seem to remember there was when Skyrim was first announced, there was a plan there were going to be arenas in different cities, and you were going to be able to play in different of those, and that got cut. But there was this weird economy feature where, like, right, if there was a village that was reliant on the logging industry, if you burned down the lumber yard, that village would not be able to trade wood, which would affect the rest of the world's economy. We had
that working. It affected the prices, but nobody could tell. Like, you don't know, like, oh wow, the wood is cheaper. So we took out the price changing. It just wasn't impactful. But you can still sabotage the lumber mills and those kind of things, and that I believe filters into the Civil War stuff. But those systems work, and actually there's some very nice animations for sabotaging the lumber mill.
I clearly have not sabotaged enough lumber mills. I need to go back into.
It just doesn't affect the prices.
Fair enough. I was always playing a good character. A good character who happened to be a thief. But the running joke about Skyrim is obviously that it is on every platform ever. I'll be honest, I have actually played the Alexa version, and I really enjoyed it for about half an hour before I realised it is just an endless seam of procedurally randomly generated questions. I'm not actually making any progress. All I'm doing is wasting half an hour shouting, use spell.
There was a joke going like, hey, Skyrim's on everything. And I was reading some Reddit thread, and someone posted they should make it. There was, so they should make it for Alexa, and I was like, oh, that would be really funny. And we were going into E3, and I was like, hey, what if we made fun of ourselves and pretended, so we did this fake commercial for the Alexa version. And so we started working. So the joke was to make the commercial, like we're poking fun at ourselves, going to come out in Alexa. But then we took the joke the full way. So the thing I love about it, E3, we show the thing and you think it's just a joke. But then if the next day, if you say it to Alexa, play Skyrim, it's real. And what's great is since Alexa's on everything, Skyrim, there's an Alexa toilet. So by default, there you go.
That's genius. But like, are there other platforms you would want it to bring it to? I don't know if you saw there was going around Twitter like a couple of weeks back. Someone has managed to get Doom Eternal up and running on the monitor of a smart fridge. So Skyrim on smart fridges, that seems like the next step, right?
I think someone has the opening of Skyrim. I saw it on Reddit on a digital pregnancy test.
Oh, I need to look that up.
I think it's just a video feed, obviously.
Yeah. Still gives you a challenge.
That's a pretty good one.
Those things are single use. You could definitely get like more money. Like if you can buy those for their use and then play Skyrim on them. We're getting silly now, so let's move on. We touched on Fallout 4. I'd like to leap ahead to Fallout 76.
Sure.
Because this was very, very different, not just from the previous Fallout games, but from previous Bethesda games, because it was multiplayer centric. And the thing that fascinated me, the idea of like this game that gives you quests, but there are no NPC quest givers just standing around. Like you're coming out into this ruined world, and you've got to investigate and find quests to do, without some chap standing there saying, "Oh, yes, can you go yonder to bandit camp and kill them for me?" What were the big challenges of doing that? Like completely, multiplayer centric, no NPCs that you can rely on. Like what are the challenges of making Fallout 76 compared to 3 and 4?
Geez, what wasn't a challenge on that game? That started as a multiplayer mode in Fallout 4. And we didn't quite, the quests in Fallout 4, like, okay, this is not going to work in a multiplayer scenario. And we were playing a lot of survival games at the time. DayZ was popular, some other things. And we said, oh, this would feel really good as obviously Fallout's a survival game. Let's make a prequel. So it kind of started as a side project that grew some momentum. We really, really enjoyed it. It's a project that changed a lot while we were making it. So we asked all of those questions. The story stuff and the quests that went in the game didn't go in until, I don't want to say halfway through the project, but it felt late in the project. And I think our designers did a great job with one arm tied behind their back, trying to tell stories through holotapes. A lot of them I really love, and terminals and things like that. And whereas the survival aspects, I think, work for a lot of people, we quickly recognized that the game wasn't really hitting with this group. It wasn't really giving our audience what they wanted. And I think they were really let down by what we delivered on day one, without a doubt. Let a lot of people down. So it over time has drifted. If you want to play it like a classic Fallout game, it delivers that, but you can do it with friends. And we've also found a lot of those kind of systemic gameplay that we want, that work in survival, but in a nice way. So fortunate the game's in a really, really good place now. But you're trying to think, hey, what were the differences? Oh, everything. Yeah.
Well, let's go on that. You said the game is in a good place now, and like we've seen this here and there of a game that has come out and not performed as expected at launch, or certainly had some teething issues, some troubles at launch, certainly had like a negative reaction at launch, but then recovered. Like, so I'm thinking things like, No Man's Sky is the big one. And I believe Drive Club managed it as well. And I think Fallout 76 can now be added to that list. Like, but we've seen so many other games where, it comes out, it struggles a bit at launch, and then 6 months, a year down the line, it is just shut down. And what does it take to take a game from, and it's a strong way of putting it, but I think it's safe, a failed launch, or at least
Sure.
Yeah. What do you take? How do you take a game from a failed launch to one that actually people still take seriously, because no matter what you do to improve it, there are people who will still hear Fallout 76 and think, oh, that was naff at launch, I won't bother. Like,
Sure.
how, yeah, that in itself is a big challenge. Like, how do you recover from a launch like that?
Well, for better or worse, our company's done it. We had Elder Scrolls Online. That wasn't my group, but the ZeniMax Online folks had been through that for us. Elder Scrolls Online had a very muted response, a very bad launch, and they retooled the game and really put their heads down to solve it. And now that's one of the most popular MMOs that has been and still is. So they helped us a lot in terms of here's some things you should do. Ultimately, we were fortunate. I would say the main thing that made the difference is, despite the issues and the very well-deserved criticism we got, there were a lot of people playing it. There were a lot of people who said, obviously not the scale of a regular Fallout we would do, like a 3 or a 4, but a lot of people, millions of people who said, I actually want this. I want it to be good. And that community, so no, there is something here. Let's keep at it. And we also felt, look, we had let everybody down. And it is I think the only thing to do in that case is to find a way. You're not erasing that moment, but you're making it right for the people who that is what they wanted. They right. And so hugely proud of the team who's worked on the game, and month after month just made it better, made it better, made it better. So I don't think there's a magic formula other than having the discipline to go through the work, but without that community out there that's making the game their own, really believing in us, I don't know that we would have gotten to where we are.
And you were saying earlier that you can now play for Fallout 76 very much like a traditional Fallout game. And a large part of that has helped is the Wastelanders expansion, which essentially kind of makes it almost single player to an extent, or at least gives you the option to play single player. When making that kind of, what assumptions do you think you made, or did you make, about what people wanted to play in a live service game that they got wrong, and then how did Wastelanders kind of address that?
Well, when we went into it, we wanted to make something different, but the audience doesn't always want something different. And that's no fault of theirs, right? It's totally understandable. And I think maybe we did a bad job saying how different it's going to be. And so for us, when we went to add the NPCs, it was, well, how would we do this? We wanted to make a very systemic game where the players brought all of that to it. Had some successes there, but probably more failures. And once we figured out, okay, how can we tell a story? How can we bring NPCs in where it feels like the world has evolved? So once we got on that, hey, people have come back, and we're going to tell this evolving story in the world where even if the trick is, we didn't want it where if you play 76 now, you've missed all of the content that was there in the beginning. We didn't want to like remove it. So the trick is doing an evolving world. And the game's going to obviously continue. And so we've thought about that. Okay, what happens in year 3? What happens in year 4? Et cetera, et cetera. So that was the trick more than the quest systems per se.
It has started to rain here, so apologies. We're going to get a very AMSR
okay.
sort of effect. So I'm going to keep my questions as brief as possible. If you were to make a similar game in future, would you still try to keep it purely multiplayer? Is there scope for a purely multiplayer only style Bethesda open world game?
I mean, you don't want to say never. I think the one thing that we would do differently is put it out there 24/7 live before we're really charging people, full price game to play. You really have to beta test these things for a long period of time, 24/7 with live players. So they are a different animal than a regular single player game that we would do. But I would never It's been overall, it's been a really positive experience for us. It's made us much better developers. It's made us better connected with our community. And so I can't say it's going to be a one-off. Obviously, the stuff we have coming, Starfield, Elder Scrolls 6, are single-player games, but I wouldn't rule it out in the future. It's been a very positive experience.
I'm very conscious of how quickly time is getting on, but honestly, I wish I had 2 hours with you. This would be glorious.
Let's look a bit over. I'm good.
Okay, good, marvelous. Let's look a little bit further. The future. What possibilities do the next gen consoles, or the next generation of consoles and PC hardware, have for both Elder Scrolls and Fallout, and more importantly, like the engine they run on, which critics have sometimes argued needs a refresh because it seems to be certainly like a similar engine to the one you made Morrowind on, if not the same as Oblivion. Like the tech underneath your games, does that need a refresh, and what can the next gen do to kind of help add more oomph to it, I guess?
Sure. Well, we refresh it with every game. We too will acknowledge it needs more work than it has in previous times, and we do that between generations, and we've been doing it. I can say that the engine work we started a while ago. I didn't want to say. Oh my God. It's been a while. We have more people doing engine work now by a factor of 5, probably than we've ever had. So the overhaul in our engine is the largest we've probably ever had. Maybe larger than Morrowind to Oblivion. There are things we do that we still like, the way we build our worlds, the way people can mod it. These are things I think that are fundamentally good about our tech stack. But from rendering to animation to pathing to procedural generation to, I don't want to say everything, but it's a significant overhaul. It's taken us longer than we would have liked, but it's going to power what we're doing with Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6. And I think when people see the results, they'll be hopefully as happy as we are with what's on the screen, but also in how we can go about making our games.
Do hardware advances kind of automatically mean better games? Like as you say, like you refresh your technology, or you at least kind of take a look at your technology every time there is an advance in console technology and PC. Like, but you look at one of Bethesda's biggest launches of the last few years has been Skyrim on Switch, which is an 8-year-old game on a console that is essentially a tablet with a mobile graphics processor. Like, so do we even need super advanced consoles and then like a super advanced engine? I know I'm going against my previous question, but do we need like super advanced consoles, super advanced technology to make games that people want to buy, I guess?
I mean, the short answer is no, right? But you can say, okay, what does it give you? And I think for the games we make, the fidelity goes up. And yes, there's some diminishing returns over time for the impact of that. But I do think you who plays a lot of games can go back and think of those games they played where they booted it up and it puts you in this world and you were like, whoa. And I think graphics and fidelity are a big means to that. And so I go back to that thing, reading the old reviews, when you step out into the world of Oblivion, or you step out of the vault in Fallout 3. I do think hardware, clock cycles matter in pulling off a world you step into that feels, I've never seen anything like this. Oh my gosh. And can I do this? And can I do this? So that moment, I still think we can do in new ways. And often that relies on hardware.
Do advances in hardware change how you view game design and how you approach a project? Do you get to the stage where are there moments in technology like, great, now we can do this that we could never do before, is completely different? Like, are there moments like that, and what sort of examples could you give?
For us, it's been the world around you, pulling off the farce in Oblivion, not something that you could do before that game. I think going forward, you had already mentioned what we do different. I think, the NPCs, how reactive they are, how many there are around you. But I think when I think about the next generation, for me, it's about accessibility, right? I'm going to move away from fidelity and say, you look at the new consoles, how fast they load, or the quick resume stuff on Xbox. I just want to play this game now. I want to be right where I was. And then maybe I can pick that up on my phone or a tablet or another console or my PC. So I think that friction between I'm playing them into it and I want to pick that up and have it go with me and have it kind of be frictionless. I think ultimately the next 5 years, I'll go further, even 10, is about making that seamless for everybody who loves games and bringing that to people who are in parts of the world or their technology that they have access to as far as hardware is not as available. Maybe they're on tablets or phones, and bringing everything we're doing to everybody.
You have mentioned Starfield a few times, so I feel I'm now allowed to ask. I want to ask about Starfield, but I know that like it's far enough out that you're not going to give me anything concrete today. Like when will we hear more about Starfield? Because it was announced what, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
2 years ago.
Yeah, so it's been out there a while, and all we have seen is a teaser. Like, when can we expect more?
I can't answer. I honestly cannot answer that right now.
I know, but I had to ask.
No, that's fair to ask. And yeah, the reason we announced that stuff is we're at the time doing 76 and an Elder Scrolls mobile game, and we wanted to make sure our fans knew here are the things coming up. We knew at the time, look, these things are going to be a ways off, but it still felt better to engage and say, here's what we're making. Look, it's going to be a while till people hear about it and really, really see it. And I could debate that, right? So a lot of us say we should just start showing stuff. But then you worry about showing some things and then people get really excited. They're like, then the next question is, when's it coming out? And you're like, well, just wait. Or then it gets delayed or et cetera, et cetera. And we like to, as much as possible when we show it, really be able to show what the final product feels like, looks like, and we're closer to release so that we're 100% confident. Here it is. Here's what it does, and here's when you can play it. But again, I could debate that. I've seen it done every way, and there's no right or wrong.
I guess that's a big challenge in itself, is like managing the expectations. You've announced it exists, and now there is already anticipation and momentum and expectations growing. Like, people are probably already assuming like it's Elder Scrolls in space or Fallout in space. Like, and it might not be. It might be something completely different. Like, but how do you manage that? Because like as you say, like, well, no, going back to our Skyrim example earlier, like I remember hearing when it was announced, all right, there's going to be this cool thing where you can just mess with the world's economy, and there's going to be arenas in every city, and like you're just going to randomly find dragons. And okay, the random dragons thing that that happened, but like what people announce is then what people expect, even though development can change so much in just the course of a couple of years, but particularly on the timescale we're talking here. Like, how do you manage expectations?
I think I've found that the audience is pretty, as long as you tell them, they're pretty forgiving, right? Hey, this changed. I just don't want to string them along too long. You get kind of fatigued. So you have to balance that fatigue of wanting something versus, consumer excitement, I think, more than anything. Also, it takes time, to be frank. Preparing trailers and demos and assets, they take time away from development. And, I can remember some games we've done where you're doing it multiple years and it's like you have to top yourself. So you do an initial demo and people get excited, but then time goes on. So of course they're not excited anymore. So you have to top your previous demo. And I'd rather just spend all that time focusing on the game and prepare kind of one big demo. And I think once we did it with Fallout 4, where it was pretty short, I've seen that happen more with other games with good success. I don't think their impact in the market has been hurt in any way that I've noticed.
We are definitely running short on time, so I'm going to narrow down to like I've got 3 more things I want to talk to you about. We spoke recently, and you told me, or you reminded me rather, that Skyrim turns 10 years old next year. And you were saying about how, like, you now have to think about, like, when you design games, you're designing them that may be played for a decade, like single player games that may be played by people for a decade, either the same people. I have friends who are still playing Skyrim, or you can just different people spread across the time. When it comes to Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6, like the success you've had with Fallout and Skyrim, and Fallout 76, like the lessons you've learned, does that change how you design games? You're designing this knowing that people are going to play it for, a much longer period of time, with or without mods, and obviously in this age of games being updated constantly as a live set. I'm not necessarily saying either Starfield or Elder Scrolls 6 are live service games, but like there is that expectation that games are going to evolve over time. Does that change how you start a project, or how you tackle it in the early stages?
It has post Skyrim, and we're always, I don't know why, I'm always surprised at how much people play it. You go and see the stats and say the median time, not average, the median time is 170 hours. And given this, how many people are playing, like, wow. So not only do we have fortunate enough to have a big audience, they just play all the time. And I say that, mean that in a good way. So that does change where, hey, we're doing this, and this is how much content, so you feel good. This is what someone's going to get. How does it compare to other things they might spend their entertainment dollars on? But it becomes more than that. Like, they're investing in this world. Their time has real meaning to them, and it does to us as well. So how can it go on forever? Mm-hmm. And it's a very different way of designing when you use the word forever, because that's the word you have to use. I can't be like, I designed this will last for 3 years versus 7 or 10. Maybe someone can do that. I cannot. So you have to think in terms of forever. And there are ways to do that, but they're easier than you think, the easy ones, but they water down the minute to minute and the hour to hour, where you don't want the minute to minute and the hour to hour to feel like a grind. And we've all experienced that do that. So part of that for us too is the modding community. Mm-hmm. That they've been with us for a long time. So it's not that we rely on them per se to add content, but it's part of the vibe of the game where from the get-go, it feels endless. And then it has systems that can systemically be doing content. And then as much as we can, we're still making stuff for Skyrim through Creation Club and some other things with some people in the community. Then you have mods. And 76, obviously, it's a very systemic system, so the players are able to do a lot. We have a lot of cool stuff coming, and it's something we're still, updating on a monthly basis. So I would say we've been very, very fortunate there. Not everybody is in the same way, where you have the ability to do it, and you have a fan base that is heavily involved in that as well.
We spoke recently more in depth about the Microsoft acquisition, and at the risk of a subtle plug, you can read that on GamesIndustry.biz. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention it here. Let's talk about, like, what was the impact of the Microsoft acquisition. I know it's early days, but like the impact on your company, your approach to the future, the series you're working on, and your ability to evolve them. Like, what does this enable?
Sure. I mean, first of all, we've worked with them for a really long time. So it kind of was, I think, maybe a shock to a lot of people, but it's more natural than you might think internally, particularly for my group, our games. Every game I've done, we've done, Morrowind helped us a lot. And then Oblivion and Skyrim and Fallouts, every game I've done, there's been some co-development and publishing arrangement that we've had. And so we've had a lot of conversations with them, like, hey, what would the next step look like? And feel we've been in line with them for a long time on, their view of where gaming can go, and been friends with Phil for a very long time and love the way they think about their players, the gaming community overall. And I guess I could boil it down to say, feel strongly this is going to allow us to make better games, the best games, and reach even more people. And that's what's, at the end of the day, most important to us.
How does Game Pass factor into this? Because obviously, like Game Pass, there's two things here. Like one is that Game Pass will enable people that may not have spent $50-$60 on Fallout will think, oh, actually, it's on Game Pass. I'm subscribed. I'll download it and I'll give it a go. I'll be perfectly honest. I'm tempted to give Fallout 76 a go now that it's on. I'm very much a single player gamer. Multiplayer Fallout didn't appeal. Now it's on Game Pass. Like, yeah, I'll give it a go. So there's that side of things, but there's also like you're designing something that, because it's so easy for people to get in, if they're already subscribed, it's so easy for them to get in, but it's also really easy for them to just get out and delete. Like, so you've got to think about like a retention, as it were. When it comes to designing future games, how does like a subscription service kind of factor into that?
I think when you're designing the game, it doesn't factor in really at all, per se. You when any game you make, you want people to enjoy it and want to come back to it and think about it when they're not playing. But the one thing Game Pass or subscription services like it can bring, you look at what it's brought to television, where certain types of content, really high budget, excellent drama stuff, it left the theaters, it left regular television. Regular television went to lowest common denominator, cheap reality television show, whatever. There's a lot of that. And so what it allows is when you're thinking about what you could do, or what kind of games are you going to greenlight, it opens up the palette dramatically, because you're not worried about someone saying, do I even want to take the time to buy that, regardless of the price, whether it's $60 or $30 or $20, and just say, oh, I heard that was really good. I own it. I'll just try it. So it's really, really good for creators. I was worried maybe 4 to 5 years ago that certain types of games that we all love would kind of go away. That would either be like match 3 free-to-play stuff or $60 kind of big budget, and then nothing else has an avenue to be successful. And with something like this, I think it opens it up dramatically and lets people experience. It's already happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you, like where you have Game Pass and you say, oh, I own that. I haven't experienced that. Oh, I'm going to try that. I'm going to try this. Or you hear, Outer Wilds, a game that I probably wouldn't have played if it wasn't for Game Pass. So I think it's a hugely positive thing for everybody. But it's still not the only thing. You'll still have your big ticket things that are going to come out, and they're going to be $60 games. You're still going to have games that are going to be free to play across everything that monetize, again, like television, whether it's ad revenue or some other things.
Last question, and thank you so much for your time today. Last question, kind of going right back to the start. Like, what advice would you give to aspiring designers and to your younger self? Now, I mean this in two contexts. What advice would you give to your younger self way back in the 90s before you started? Like, what things would he need to know or think about? And then if your younger self was starting now and we're making a Terminator game now or whatever it might be, what advice do you have for people who want to be the next Todd Howard?
When your parents say, put the video games down, that'll do nothing for you, just say, you wait. I think the main advice, and we've said this for a while, is great games are played, not made. Don't think you have the most brilliant idea. You have to make stuff, and not be so beholden to, I have the best idea. It's a team effort, right? I've worked with a lot of the same people for 20 years, and we're pretty open to criticism from each other and our fans and getting better at it. But you just need to make stuff and see how it feels to you, how it feels to other people, and you're going to have a lot of failures. Some of those will be public, and some of those will be private failures before they see it. And I think today, if you look at that advice, if you were saying, how does it translate today? People's ability to make games and put them out and have people touch them is unlike at any other point in history. So when people usually come to us who say, well, go ahead and make something, put it up, let people play it. You'll learn more and enjoy the process along the way.
That is all we have time for. That's probably more than we had time for. Todd, thank you so much for your time today.
It was great.
And congratulations again on your Develop Star Award.
Thank you. Very honored.
Thank you all for joining us. If you're tuning in late or missed something, if I've done my job right, a write-up should be going live on GamesIndustry.biz any second now-ish. You can see and hear more from Todd when you watch the Develop Star Awards ceremony at 5 p.m. UK time on Wednesday, and you can find out more about the rest of the great talks happening this week at developconference.com.